Case of the Blummell family. Roger Blummell, born January 17, 1965, was raised in a big, close-knit family with strong values. Even in high school, he was driven and ambitious. He worked in transportation and later discovered his talent in sales, where he excelled. Friends say he could sell anything to anyone, thanks to his kind, cheerful personality. He was always happy and loved making others smile. Roger enjoyed a fulfilling life and a strong bond with his family, but something was missing, a life partner. That all changed one day when he met the right person. Although the details of their meeting are unclear, a close friend recalled that Roger was immediately smitten with a young woman and confidently declared his intention to marry her by the end of the evening. The woman who caught his attention was Melissa. Born on January 1, 1960, in Wichita, Melissa grew up in a loving family of 6 siblings, although she tragically lost a younger sister in infancy. Melissa was a kind, diligent, and helpful person who always put others before herself. She started her career as a bank cashier and worked her way up the ranks, earning promotions through her dedication, teamwork, and strong work ethic. Her career was marked by success, ultimately leading to her appointment as vice president of the bank. The first meeting of Roger and Melissa marked the start of a lifelong partnership between two kindred spirits, who tied the knot in 1991. On the surface, the Blummell family seemed to have it all. Melissa's rapid rise through the banking ranks, while Roger's charisma enabled him to successfully launch his own business venture. With a natural talent for bringing people together, Roger thrived on sharing good times with friends and spreading joy to those around him. In Melissa, he had found the ideal partner to share in his adventures. What's more, the couple's strong sense of social responsibility drove them to participate in and contribute to various charitable, sporting, and community-driven initiatives in their locality. The Blummell family had an idyllic life, but it lacked one thing: a child to bring laughter and joy. After years of trying to conceive, they decided to adopt. A social worker introduced them to Kesha, who was putting her 2 sons, Tony and Chris, up for adoption. The Blummell family wanted a closed adoption, but Kesha preferred an open one. In the end, the Blummell family approached one, and Tony and Chris became part of their family, starting a new life. Tony was amazed by daily dinners. The kids quickly adapted, thriving in elementary school and beyond. They excelled in high school, making diverse friends and starring in sports like wrestling and football. Tony's wrestling prowess earned him 2nd place in a division competition, promising a bright future for the family. However, Tony's family life took a drastic turn for the worse during his senior year of high school. Until then, he had been a model child, but suddenly he became rebellious and constantly clashed with his parents, resentful that they favored his younger brother, Chris. He started drinking, breaking curfews, and even smoking marijuana, causing chaos at home and making it seem like all hope was lost for him to get back on track. Tony had always dreamed of joining the United States Air Force after graduating, but his new behavior ruined his chances. In 2013, he was arrested for a violent offense and then again for driving under the influence, which meant his record would prevent him from pursuing a career in military aviation. Tony's life spun out of control after these events. Lacking direction after high school, he shunned education and jobs, preferring to sleep in and get high on cannabis. Melissa lived in fear of his violent outbursts, and there was another secret the family didn't know. Since 2013, Kesha had contacted her biological sons on social media. Tony was excited to reconnect, but Chris seemed unreceptive. Kesha was devastated after giving them up, but relieved they were with a good family together. Reconnecting with Tony thrilled her, but she resented the family for allegedly turning Chris against her. Moreover, when Kesha learned about Tony's troubles with his adoptive parents, she saw an opportunity to reconnect with her son and swiftly extended an invitation for him to visit her. At the adoptive home, things worsened. Tony's rage boiled over, and he punched a hole in the wall. This was the last straw. The family realized they and Chris were no longer safe. After failed attempts to address Tony's behavior, Roger and Melissa made the tough decision to ask him to leave. He started by wandering aimlessly, but he soon understood he needed to take action to support himself financially. He got jobs at fast food restaurants and to make some extra money, he also sold cannabis. Despite having no fixed address and sleeping at a different friend's place each night, he eventually fell in with a group of young people who were heavily into drug abuse. Amidst the despairing events, a lifeline emerged for Tony when Kesha extended an invitation for him to move to California and live with her. Tony seized the opportunity with eagerness, and the reunion took place in September 2013 at Kesha's California residence. Accompanied by his high school best friend, Braden, who had dropped out in his junior year to pursue a life of drug dealing, he arrived filled with hope, seeking Kesha's support, who was well-versed in the drug trade, to establish a large-scale marijuana operation in the area. They even discussed entering the medical cannabis market. The reality was that they had arrived to live in a small apartment, which had only one room. It is not hard to imagine that the situation in the place quickly became tense, particularly because Sean, Kesha's partner, had 2 jobs and was the only one bringing in money to cover the expenses for 5 people. Kesha only contributed a part of the social assistance she received for her daughter. Kesha, Tony, and Braden spent their days using drugs, and the woman's younger daughter was constantly under that bad influence. Sean reached a breaking point when she discovered Tony and Braden selling marijuana near her house. She told them to stop, citing the danger to her as the property owner. Then, she issued an ultimatum: get a job or leave the apartment. But instead of complying, the group banded together against her, eventually leaving for a nearby hotel for 2 weeks. However, without income, they couldn't afford the hotel bill. They didn't consider getting a decent job due to their financial struggles. Their initial plan was to head back to Kansas, possibly because Tony was familiar with the area from his drug dealings. After nearly a day of driving, they decided to stop in Arizona and spend the night at a hotel. It was during their stay that Tony shared an idea with his companions: to kill his adoptive parents in order to inherit their wealth. Once they arrived in Wichita and settled into a hotel room they'd rented for a month, they focused on finalizing the details of this plan. Tony had devised a straightforward plan. He would kill Roger and Melissa, collect the insurance payout, sell off their assets, and use the proceeds to launch a more extensive drug operation. Tony was convinced that his original family would amass a fortune by growing and selling marijuana. He even pinpointed the ideal day to carry out the crime: Friday, November 15, 2013. This date suited him perfectly since his brother Chris would be away, attending a wrestling event related to his practice. As a former wrestling star, Tony still maintained connections with some team members, which is how he learned about his brother's commitment that evening. Tony hatched a plan to invite Roger and Melissa to a meeting under the guise of discussing their past issues and making amends. While they were out, Braden would bring Kesha to the empty residence, where she would steal valuables. Tony knew the location of a stash of emergency cash his adoptive parents kept at home. The plan was to make it look like a botched robbery. When Roger and Melissa returned, Kesha would kill them. Initially, everyone thought the plan was solid, but Braden later got cold feet and refused to participate. He did, however, agree to help by obtaining the necessary guns. As an alternative, he suggested his friend Andrew, a former high school acquaintance, who could drive Kesha to the residence and play a supporting role in the crime. Braden obtained 2 pistols from other criminals as promised. It's worth noting that there was never any plan to share the money with Andrew, who was hired to drive and provide backup for Kesha during the robbery in exchange for $11,000. Kesha would ultimately be the one carrying out the heist. In early November 2013, Kesha shared a photo on social media of herself with Tony, accompanied by a caption that read, "A bond that cannot be broken." Then, on Friday, November 15th, Tony's prediction came true. His adoptive parents agreed to meet with him, just as he had foreseen. The encounter took place peacefully. At the Blummells' house, a completely different scenario unfolded. Following Roger and Melissa's departure for the meeting, Kesha and Andrew snuck in, broke into the garage, and started searching through the house. They seized the chance to steal some small valuable items and the cash the couple kept on hand for emergencies. With the first part of their plan accomplished, Kesha and Andrew concealed themselves near the secluded residence, lying in wait for their victims to return. Tony called, saying his meeting had ended and he was dropped off at the hotel. The wait was short. As the Blummell vehicle stopped, two attackers emerged. Kesha stood by Melissa's side. Andrew aimed at Roger. Melissa, still shocked, recognized the mother of the adopted children. She barely said, "Oh my God, Kesha," before a shot to the head made her collapse. Roger, frantic, tried to help his wife. Kesha approached, gun aimed at him, but it jammed. She tried again. Roger frozen in shock beside his wife's body. The gun finally fired, and he collapsed next to her. After the fatal plan was executed, Kesha and Andrew hastily departed in the vehicle they had arrived in. The Blummell spouses remained at the scene until approximately 9:15 p.m., when Chris returned from his meeting to find the devastating scene. He quickly called 911, reporting that he had just arrived home to find his parents semi-conscious inside their van. He described Roger as coughing and Melissa as nodding her head up and down, both with visible gunshot wounds to their heads. The dispatcher instructed him to attempt resuscitation efforts while emergency services arrived shortly thereafter to take control of the situation. Miraculously, the Blummell family was still alive, their lives clinging to a fragile thread, and they were swiftly rushed to a hospital. Meanwhile, back at the hotel where they were staying, Kesha appeared to suffer a panic attack, declaring that she urgently needed to take an illicit substance, which she proceeded to do, joined by the other boys. Also, at that moment, Kesha handed over the used gun and a wallet containing stolen cash and items to be discarded in a nearby stream. Andrew disposed of the evidence in a nearby park's pond. The next day, Tony used the proceeds to start dealing marijuana, earning his first $100 profit. Tragically, on the same day, Melissa lost her battle with her injuries and passed away at the age of 53. Tony visited his father in the hospital, unaware that he had been previously removed from the Blummells' will and insurance policies. As it turned out, the two heinous crimes had been committed for nothing. In the days that followed, it emerged that Andrew had not received payment and was even unaware that Kesha had stolen cash from the Blummell family's home. Eventually, fate caught up with them. During the initial inspection of the Blummell residence, the police observed that the garage door had been forced open, and upon entering the house, they found everything in disarray, with items scattered haphazardly. It was confirmed that money, jewelry, and other valuables had been stolen. The authorities considered the possibility that the attack on the couple had been a consequence of their arrival, while the thieves were still inside. However, since the fatal assault had occurred prior to the couple's entry into the home, this initial hypothesis was soon dismissed. In the van where Roger and Melissa were attacked, no significant fingerprints were found, although investigators did discover a bullet casing. Then the authorities shifted their focus to the victims' workplaces, suspecting that a disgruntled client might have sought revenge. However, this theory was also ruled out, so it was time to interview people close to the couple. Tony was first on the detective's list, as he had been the last person seen alive with the victims. But he vehemently denied any involvement, claiming he knew nothing about the incident. According to him, after finishing dinner, he had returned directly to the hotel where he was staying with his mother. The hotel staff corroborated this alibi. Next on the list was Chris, who had discovered the bodies, but he was quickly cleared after verifying that he had been at a dinner with the wrestling team at the time of the incident. However, the investigators discovered an anomaly in his behavior. He didn't appear overly distraught, instead seeming lost in thought. When police pursued this lead and questioned him about his parents' injuries, Chris promptly replied that one person came to mind. He added that the only individual who might harbor a grudge against their parents and possibly be capable of such an act was his older brother, Tony. With this significant lead, the authorities caught a fortunate break in their hunt for the culprits. A man contacted the police, revealing that a young acquaintance of Tony's had approached him to buy a gun. The detectives homed in on this individual, and upon digging into his background, uncovered a long history of drug-related offenses. Furthermore, they discovered he had accompanied Tony on a trip to California. The suspect was none other than Braden. Shortly after, Braden received a message from his family warning him that the sheriff's office investigators were seeking to question him about the Blummell case. The morning after, Braden voluntarily went to the police station. According to a press report, on his way to the station, Braden stopped at a pond to dispose of an item, allegedly the guns used in the crime, which had not been discarded as planned. As it happened, he was already under surveillance, and when the police searched the water, they found an unused pistol in the bag he had thrown away. Braden's interrogation lasted 3 days, during which he initially denied any involvement in the incident. However, he eventually cracked under the pressure from the authorities, confessing everything he knew, revealing that the idea for the attack originated with Tony. Tony Blummell, 18, and his biological mother, Kesha, 35, were arrested on November 19, 2013, at their hotel. Andrew, also 18, was taken into custody, and Braden, another 18-year-old, was arrested the following day. Initially, Kesha denied any involvement in the robbery and other crimes, while the 3 young men confessed. On November 25, 2013, the accused made their first court appearance via video conference, facing identical charges: first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated robbery, burglary, and theft. Bail was set at $500,000 for the 3 young men and $1 million for Kesha. On December 21st, Roger's heart stopped beating, and at just 48 years old, he was reunited with his beloved Melissa. Following Roger's death, the situation for Kesha and the 3 young men took a dire turn as they faced the possibility of being charged with capital murder, which carried the risk of a death penalty sentence. On January 3, 2014, the 4 detainees were formally charged with 1 count of capital murder for allegedly killing multiple people in the same incident. Kesha also faced additional charges: 2 counts of aggravated robbery, 1 count of burglary, and 1 count of theft. The preliminary hearing took place on July 17th of that same year, by which time Braden had cut a deal with authorities, agreeing to become the prosecution's star witness in exchange for leniency in his sentence. In 2015, following a year of negotiations, Braden and 2 others implicated in the crime reached agreements with the prosecution. Under these agreements, the accused parties would not contest the charges brought against them, and in return, they would relinquish their right to appeal their sentences. In exchange, the prosecution agreed to refrain from pursuing the death penalty and to dismiss certain charges. In a series of separate hearings commencing mid-2015, each of the accused parties formally confirmed their intention to plead guilty. Kesha got life in prison without parole for capital murder, plus 10 years for aggravated robbery. Her sentences will run back to back. In court, she expressed regret and respect for the victim's family but denied involvement in the crime. She's still in a high-security prison today. Tony Blummell, known to all as Tony, received the same sentence as his mother. At the hearing, his Aunt Christina read a victim impact statement, thanking authorities for justice and mentioning the love Roger and Melissa had shown Tony. Tony listened in silence, tears welling up. Christina told him he'd chosen his path, and one day he might understand the consequences of those choices. Tony's now in a correctional facility with a record of many infractions. A week later, Andrew was found guilty of first- and second-degree murder, sentenced to life and 155 months. Last, Braden, who'd made a deal with prosecutors, was guilty of second-degree murder, sentenced to 242 years. His first release chance is May 28, 2035, but he's had 71 disciplinary reports for bad behavior. The district attorney was satisfied with the case outcome. Despite waiving appeal rights, Kesha tried and failed. Undisputed, Roger and Melissa Blummell's lives ended tragically. Kesha's excess-driven life led to tragedy, sparked by a descendant rejecting her. For his part, Tony repaid the couple's love and care with resentment, envy, and violence, opting for an unjustifiable path of substance abuse that ultimately led him to commit a double crime. As a consequence, Kesha's younger daughter was forced to grow up in a foster home. In contrast, Chris Blummell, with the support of his family, managed to overcome the ordeal and build a fulfilling life. Stephanie Newman was born on June 3, 1967, in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. Stephanie grew up in a Jewish family led by her parents, Louis Herman Newman and his wife, Annie. She had 2 siblings, Philadelphia is known for its significant historical, cultural, and artistic contributions, a quieter life away from the city's hustle and bustle. Stephanie was raised in Elkins Park, a suburb north of Philadelphia, where she quickly showed herself to be both beautiful and intelligent. At a young age, she began studying the Torah, the compilation of books that contain Jewish law and heritage, and she performed public readings, which require very specific intonations. Stephanie was active, extroverted, and sociable, never one to stay still, according to those close to her. At 16, she started working as a counselor at a girls' summer camp during her summer break. It was there she met Craig Rabinowitz, who worked at a nearby boys' camp. Craig, born on September 28, 1963, was 4 years older than Stephanie. Little is known about his early life, except that he was the son of an executive at a prominent clothing manufacturer. Craig frequently visited Stephanie's camp due to his responsibilities, and they started talking. Eventually, he asked her out, and although she was initially hesitant, something changed after their second date. From then on, the couple became inseparable, maintaining their relationship for 7 years. Stephanie's romance did not affect her academic performance. She was diligent in her studies, graduating from high school with a National Merit Scholarship. She went on to earn a degree from Bryn Mawr College, a private women's liberal arts college. After graduating, she enrolled at Temple University to study law. Craig finished high school as an average student, excelling in sports like ice hockey and baseball. He also attended Temple University but dropped out after his first semester. After their long courtship, Stephanie and Craig married in June 1990. With the help of Stephanie's parents, they moved into an apartment. Stephanie's new role as a wife did not hinder her academic pursuits, and she graduated from law school in 1992 with excellent grades. Around the same time, Craig and a friend started a company called CNC Vending, which imported latex gloves for medical use from Malaysia. The company made a few sales before dissolving, but Craig continued in the same business, registering a new company called CNC Supplies. He explained to his in-laws and friends that he would import containers of gloves from Malaysia to sell wholesale, estimating a 33% profit margin. To maximize profits, he needed $88,000 to import 4 containers. The figures he presented were impressive, and he easily convinced Stephanie's parents, one of her brothers, and some friends to invest in the business. While Craig seemed headed for success, Stephanie was also making strides. After graduating, she took the bar exam, a challenging test for law graduates to practice in the United States. Stephanie passed on her first attempt, and combined with her excellent grades, this did not go unnoticed. She quickly received an attractive job offer from a prestigious law firm with a salary she couldn't refuse. Stephanie had clear dreams and aimed to own a home in a good neighborhood. After 4 years of marriage, the couple moved in with her parents to save money for a down payment on their first house. This dream came true when they moved into a cozy 2-story home in Marion, on Philadelphia's main line. This upper-middle-class neighborhood was home to professionals, bankers, executives, and entrepreneurs, many of whom were part of the local Jewish community. With a new life goal achieved, Stephanie's dreams were nearly complete. She only needed a child to crown them. It wasn't long before this wish came true with the arrival of a healthy and beautiful baby girl named Haley Sarah Rabinowitz. To everyone, they seemed like the perfect family. Stephanie, a promising lawyer with a rising career, Craig, a businessman owning an import company, and their lovely daughter completing the picture. Neighbors had no complaints, often seeing Craig strolling around with Haley in her stroller. But this perfect life was short-lived. As we often see, perfect lives rarely exist, and what appeared to be Stephanie's dream fulfillment soon came to an end. On Tuesday, April 29, 1997, Stephanie and her mother went out in the morning to shop for Haley's first birthday preparations. That evening, Craig, Stephanie, and the baby had dinner at a luxurious Thai restaurant with Stephanie's parents, Lou and Annie. After a delightful meal, they all returned home, with some accounts suggesting everyone went to Craig's house. Upon arrival, Craig mentioned he had too much coffee and felt jittery, so he decided to take Haley for a walk in her stroller. When he returned, his in-laws had already left. After putting Haley to bed, Stephanie and Craig had a beer in the living room before Stephanie went upstairs to take a bath. Meanwhile, Craig stayed downstairs watching a hockey game featuring the local team, the Flyers. Around midnight on April 29, 1997, Craig made a frantic 911 call, reporting an accident. He claimed his wife had fallen in the bathtub and he found her unconscious and couldn't revive her. Minutes later, the first police officers arrived at the Rabinowitz house, finding the door open and announcing their presence as they entered. They heard Craig's shouts from upstairs and found him holding Stephanie's head above water while her body was submerged in the bathtub. The officers helped lift Stephanie from the tub and attempted resuscitation, trying to restore her consciousness. The commotion woke Haley, who began to cry, and the police told Craig to attend to her. Craig soon returned with Haley in his arms as the paramedics arrived to take over. Stephanie was still unconscious, her body cold and blue. The police informed Craig he needed to come with them, but he was unsure what to do with the baby. At that moment, neighbors, noticing the police activity, offered to stay with Haley. An officer questioned Craig about what happened, and he explained that after dinner with his in-laws, he had a drink with his wife, who then went for a bath to relax since she had trouble sleeping. He stayed watching the hockey game but heard a thud from the bathroom that sounded like a shampoo bottle falling. Not concerned at first, as this often happened to Stephanie, he eventually went to check after she didn't return for over half an hour. He found her unconscious and fully submerged in the water, tried to revive her, and when he couldn't, called 911. He opened the front door for the responders and held her head above water as he couldn't lift her from the tub. Craig's clothes were wet, so the officer advised him to change. Meanwhile, the officer noticed the tub draining, likely dislodged when they moved Stephanie's body. He replaced the plug, aware the scene needed preservation for any potential investigation. The officer also recalled the bathroom floor was completely dry, with no water outside the tub, something that stuck in his mind. After changing clothes, Craig was taken to the hospital where Stephanie had been transported. He was informed that despite their efforts, Stephanie was declared dead at 1:29 a.m. Overwhelmed, Craig held his head, repeatedly saying he couldn't believe it and expressed he couldn't go through such loss again, referencing his father's death from cancer 3 years earlier. Craig then faced the daunting task of notifying family and friends about the tragic accident. When Stephanie's parents arrived at the hospital and confirmed her death, Annie collapsed in her husband's arms. They soon began asking when Stephanie's body would be released, as Jewish tradition requires burial as soon as possible, preferably within 24 hours. However, they faced a significant problem. The certifying doctor deemed an autopsy necessary, finding it unusual for a healthy 29-year-old woman to die from a bathtub fall without any visible injuries. This not only delayed the burial but also conflicted with their religious customs, which prohibit desecration of the deceased's body. Additionally, this delayed the period known as Shiva, the 7-day mourning period observed by family members who stay at home, refrain from any form of entertainment, and even cover mirrors to show they are not concerned with their physical appearance. The coroner's stance was firm and unyielding, forcing the family to accept it. The autopsy took place in the morning, conducted by the county's deputy medical examiner. By the time the doctor examined Stephanie's body, 12 hours had passed since the emergency was reported. At that time, the situation had changed considerably. The experienced coroner first noticed petechial hemorrhages, small red spots that appear when tiny blood vessels bleed internally. These can be caused by certain illnesses, prolonged effort, medication, or criminal actions like asphyxiation. In Stephanie's case, petechiae were present around her eyes, and that wasn't all her body revealed. As time passed, deep bruises became visible on both sides of her neck and under her jaw. Additionally, she had bruises on her arms and legs, particularly around her knees and elbows. These injuries were difficult to explain as the result of a simple fall in the bathtub. Moreover, the stomach contents examination showed undigested food, suggesting that death occurred around 9:30 p.m., more than 2 hours before Craig called emergency services. At this point, the only suspect for any potential wrongdoing against Stephanie was her husband, as he had assured the police that only he, his wife, and their baby were home with all doors and windows securely locked. Another detail noted by the first responding officer was that Stephanie was in the bathtub wearing all her jewelry, which is unusual for someone taking a bath. When she was removed from the tub, she was still wearing her earrings, 2 gold bracelets, one with stones, her wedding ring, and even a gold watch. This, along with the dry bathroom floor, didn't match Craig's story about his supposed efforts to lift her from the tub. The authorities quickly launched an investigation, re-inspecting the Rabinowitz residence and confirming nothing was stolen and there were no signs of forced entry. During this search, they found a bottle of zolpidem, a medication used for treating sleep problems. Craig stated that both he and his wife had been prescribed this medication due to their sleeping issues. Once the post-mortem studies were completed, Stephanie's body was released to her family for burial, which took place at Mount Lebanon Cemetery. While the family was still grappling with their loss, another shocking event occurred. Just hours after the funeral, Craig was arrested as a suspect in his wife's death. In the following months, Stephanie's parents offered $75,000 for Craig's bail, but some sources claim the bail was set at $5 million. The case took another twist when the police received an anonymous tip suggesting they look into Delilah's Den, a luxurious local gentleman's club, for information on Craig. Following this lead, investigators searched the Rabinowitz residence, finding a hidden space in a closet ceiling with a movable panel. Inside, they discovered several men's magazines, a bag full of receipts, and what appeared to be a handwritten ledger. To make sense of the documents, the investigators called in a certified public accountant to organize and interpret the vast amount of financial data. While these studies were ongoing, detectives pursued the anonymous tip at Delilah's Denver. There, they learned that Craig was a well-known regular, frequenting not only the general services but also the exclusive champagne room, where dancers performed personalized sessions. It became evident that Craig had a particular affinity for an exotic dancer named Summer, whose real name was Shannon Reinert, a 24-year-old who lived with her 2 children. Shannon was located and questioned, confirming Craig was a frequent client who bought her gifts, including jewelry and furniture for her home. She admitted they had met outside the club but insisted their relationship was purely platonic, involving companionship rather than intimacy. Shannon revealed that Craig had confided in her about marital problems, saying he cared for Stephanie but no longer loved her, adding that leaving her would bankrupt him. Additionally, it was discovered that on the night of Stephanie's death, Craig had called Shannon to inform her of his wife's passing, a call that deeply saddened the dancer. But these discoveries paled in comparison to the revelations of the public accountant who examined the papers found at the Rabinowitz house. According to bank and credit card records, in the 9 months before the incident, Craig had spent a staggering $156,000 at the Gentlemen's Club. From January to April 1997 alone, he incurred $29,000 in charges at Delilah's Den, with an average of 3 visits per week, spending over $2,000 weekly. Craig's gifts to Shannon included not only furniture for her living room, dining room, and nursery, worth about $8,500, but also expensive presents like a Tiffany's pearl necklace costing over $1,900, which he did not give to his wife on Valentine's Day. Additionally, Craig had purchased 2 memberships to an exclusive sports club for himself and Shannon, each costing $365, plus $136 monthly for laundry services, shoe polishing, and lockers in the VIP section. He also spent a small fortune on fine clothing for his favorite dancer. Contrary to Shannon's claim that there was no intimate relationship, Craig's bank records showed frequent stays at 5-star hotels, averaging $500 per night, always registering with Shannon and using the rooms for only a few hours. Moreover, with all the money Craig was squandering, one would assume his latex glove import business was thriving. But investigations revealed that the company had conducted transactions between 1990 and 1992, but no activity was recorded thereafter. No contracts, no purchases, no sales. In short, the business didn't exist. So where did all the money come from? It turned out Craig had been running a Ponzi scheme, named after Charles Ponzi, who famously carried out such a plan in the 1920s in the United States until it was discovered. This pyramid scheme involves promising investors good returns from legitimate economic activities, but these returns are paid from the funds of new investors. Craig had drawn in Stephanie's family, friends, and others. Initially, things went well because Stephanie earned a good salary. However, after giving birth, she wanted to spend time with the baby and arranged with her law firm to reduce her workload, resulting in a proportional decrease in income, amounting to only $33,000 annually at the time of the incident, insufficient to sustain the couple's lifestyle. This also made Craig's lavish tastes and financial maneuvers unsustainable. He was aware of the high probability of his schemes being exposed. In a final move, following Haley's birth, Craig took out 2 insurance policies, one for Stephanie worth over $1.5 million and another for himself worth $1.6 million. These policies were in addition to Stephanie's coverage from her law firm, which insured her for $500,000 and her husband for $150,000. According to the accountant's analysis, the calculations were simple, written in Craig's handwriting. In the event of Stephanie's death, Craig would receive over $2 million. This amount would allow him to settle about $700,000 in debts to his investors and keep around $1.5 million. He planned to retain $400,000 and place $1 million in a bank account whose interest would yield over $60,000 annually, allowing him to live comfortably. Shortly after his wife's death, Craig pawned several of her jewelry pieces, including her wedding ring, obtaining $2,200. Additionally, it was reported that he pawned jewelry inherited by Stephanie from her great-grandmother shortly after her death. Moreover, the papers stored by Craig showed that the couple had bought their house 2 years earlier for $230,000, but had since taken out 2 mortgages totaling $300,500, along with some loans from friends. In the second half of 1997, a preliminary hearing was held to determine if there was enough evidence to prosecute Craig for his wife's death. The case was presented by the first assistant district attorney, who explained the Ponzi scheme and how, at the time of the incident, Craig knew his lies were unsustainable. According to the prosecution, one theory was that Stephanie was sedated with a triple dose of Ambien, a medication prescribed only to Craig. Based on bruises found on Stephanie's right side, one hypothesis was that she died elsewhere in the house and was dragged up the stairs to be placed in the bathtub. Another possibility was that after administering an excessive dose of the sleep medication, Craig carried her to the bathroom to drown her in the tub once she fell asleep. He undressed the body, forgetting to remove the jewelry, and placed her in the water. Possibly, the contact with the water woke Stephanie, causing her to struggle, prompting her husband to strangle her. A process that likely took about 4.5 minutes. During the struggle, she likely injured her elbows and knees against the sides of the tub. The prosecutor revealed that a book about mortuary topics was found on Craig's nightstand, which stated that only 13% of deaths are subject to autopsy. This led him to believe that, coupled with religious considerations, the odds were in his favor, prompting him to take a calculated risk, not anticipating an unyielding coroner. It was also discovered that Craig planned to flee after his wife's funeral, as a suitcase with thousands of dollars in cash was found in the trunk of his car. Court documents revealed that years earlier, Craig had been detained during an investigation into a prostitution ring in Philadelphia but received immunity in exchange for his testimony in a 1993 trial, already married to Stephanie. Meanwhile, Craig's defense tried to bring up a supposed man who had knocked on a neighbor's door asking for directions. But the police confirmed that Craig was the only man at the Rabinowitz house, something he had himself affirmed, and there were no signs of forced entry. The calculations in Craig's handwritten ledger about what he would receive upon his wife's death and how he would spend it left no doubt that the act was premeditated. The revelations during this process left Stephanie's family and friends in shock. The attorney representing Stephanie's parents, Louis and Annie, read a statement saying they were overwhelmed by the information uncovered. They believed they knew Craig, but it was clear they had been deceived, just like everyone else he had spoken to. Friends and family thought he was a wonderful husband and father. They had even helped with nearly $100,000 for his so-called import business. The prosecution maintained that Craig's situation had reached a breaking point. His credit cards were maxed out, the house was overmortgaged, and friends and family expected returns from his non-existent business. Admitting the truth would mean his life was destroyed. Instead, ending his wife's life would allow him to clear his debts and fulfill his fantasy with Summer. Later, Craig's defense attempted to have the fraud and murder charges tried separately, but this was not accepted. The trial was set to begin on October 30th, 1997. When the trial date arrived, unfortunately, Lewis, Stephanie's father, had passed away a month earlier and could not be present. On the first day of the hearing, everything changed. Craig pleaded guilty to killing his wife to obtain the insurance money. Shaking and sobbing, he claimed he decided to confess after a dream where his wife, father, and father-in-law approached him, placing their hands on his shoulders, telling him it was time to do the right thing. He added that he couldn't subject his family and his 17-month-old daughter to such a painful process. Before finishing his statement, he admitted that his life had become a sham, a counterfeit, and a fraud, and the hole he was digging grew deeper and deeper. What was right became wrong and vice versa. He added that his life was on a slippery, steep path and he had no excuses to offer. Following his statement, the judge sentenced Craig Rabinowitz, 34, to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the murder of his wife, Stephanie Rabinowitz. According to his prison records last updated on May 15, 2024, Craig remains incarcerated at the State Correctional Institution in Pennsylvania. In his mugshot taken in October 2022, at 58 years old and with a shaved head, he no longer looked as glamorous as in 1997. He is now 60 years old. Further details emerged during the investigations, such as the couple's return to Louis and Annie's home supposedly to save money for their dream house. In reality, they had been evicted from their apartment and were being sued for $6,000 plus legal fees, a debt Stephanie's parents eventually paid. Beyond the financial details lies the reality of Haley Sarah, who grew up with a father in prison and a deceased mother. She turned one the day her mother was buried and had to adjust to a new environment, new faces, and arms different from her mother's warm and loving embrace. Stephanie's maternal grandparents took care of Haley, and after her husband's death, Annie received family support to help shoulder the responsibility. Financial provisions were made for Haley's future. The funeral announcement requested contributions to an account in her name. Stephanie's law firm also established a trust fund for her. The house where the tragedy occurred, which became a site of curiosity for journalists and locals, sold easily in just 4 weeks for $225,000, only $5,000 less than they paid in 1995, but about $25,000 below market value due to its dark past. The sale proceeds were used entirely to pay off the mortgages on the property. In a twist of justice, Stephanie's life insurance money, which Craig had planned to use to solve his problems, was placed in a trust for Haley's future. A year after the incident, Philadelphia Weekly interviewed Craig in prison. He claimed Stephanie made him feel controlled and emasculated, describing her as overly orderly and rule-bound, while he preferred going with the flow, suggesting Stephanie was practically to blame for her own death. He also stated that if released, the first thing he would do is find Shannon. However, it seemed Shannon did not share his passion, as he reportedly wrote to her several times without receiving a response. Despite everything, it is clear that Stephanie was a wonderful, intelligent young woman who dreamed of marrying a good partner, having a home, and raising a baby. Yet Craig's selfishness, ambition, and lust turned these dreams into a nightmare, not just for Stephanie's loved ones, but also for their own daughter. The case of Athena Strand. Athena Strand was born on May 25, 2015 in the small town of Duncan, Oklahoma, USA. Her parents divorced and her father moved to Texas while Athena still lived with her mother in Oklahoma. Despite living far apart, her father kept in touch and visited her whenever possible. Sometimes her mother would bring Athena to see her father so they could spend time together. Both her parents remarried later and Athena had 2 younger sisters. Athena was a cheerful, sociable child. She loved to play and spend a lot of time outdoors. In the winter of 2022, when Athena was 7 years old, she temporarily left Oklahoma to live with her father in Texas until the New Year holidays ended. During this time, Athena attended a local elementary school. Her father's house was located in a remote rural area surrounded by forests and vast fields. Here, Athena had a great time exploring nature with her father and also built a good relationship with his new wife, Elizabeth. On November 30th, Athena returned home from school at around 4:15 p.m., just like every other day. She was home alone with her mother, Elizabeth, because her father and grandfather had gone hunting. That evening, Athena had an argument with Elizabeth. Athena finally felt upset and decided to go to her own room. Meanwhile, Elizabeth went to the kitchen to prepare dinner. After about 20 minutes, Elizabeth went to Athena's room to call her to dinner, but she was gone. She started searching the whole house, but couldn't find Athena anywhere. Elizabeth called the relative of her husband who lived nearby. Although Athena often visited the relatives, this time the relatives said that she was missing. Next, Elizabeth called her husband and told him about the situation. Her husband immediately asked her to contact the police and return home immediately. When she got home, Elizabeth called the 911 emergency number at around 640. Only 14 minutes later, the police arrived at her house. She explained the situation to the police and said that she thought Athena might have left home because of an argument between mother and child. Initially, the police seemed suspicious of Elizabeth because she had reported the child missing 40 minutes after discovering the incident. However, after listening to her description of the search around the house and contacting family members, they concluded that she might be telling the truth. The police immediately began searching the surrounding area. Although it was already dark, they still organized a search force within a radius of several kilometers around the house. They believed that the child might have gotten lost in the dark and needed urgent help. They focused on searching the entire area, including the woods and fields. Police also considered the possibility of kidnapping, but found no evidence to support this theory. There was no sign of an intruder in the house and no strange noises or screams that night. Police received support from family and town residents in their efforts to find the missing Athena. The girl's mother quickly arrived at the scene after learning of her daughter's disappearance. But the results were still inconclusive as no trace of Athena was found. The search became more difficult as the area around the house was quite difficult to access, especially at night. Therefore, the police continued the search at 7 a.m. the next morning with more police officers joining in. As news of the disappearance spread, hundreds of volunteers volunteered to join the search effort. Some came on horses and ATVs, while police used drones and helicopters equipped with thermal cameras to search for Athena. By the end of the day, Athena had still not been found. Police were concerned for her safety because of the cold weather at the beginning of winter. Although Texas is a small southern state, the temperature had dropped to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Since the girl was wearing thin clothes, it would be really difficult to endure such weather. On the third day, the search continued, and the police expanded the area to search for Athena. The police became increasingly suspicious that Athena had left the house on her own. During these days, they searched for miles in all directions, but they could not find the girl. The police identified the people who were near Athena's house that night. However, Athena's house was located in a special location, far from the main road, and there were no surveillance cameras in the area. However, they quickly got some important clues. A courier service had delivered to Athena's house that evening. The police contacted the courier company and learned that the delivery to the address was entrusted to an outside contractor. They then contacted that contractor and determined that the truck had arrived at Athena's house. Each of these trucks was equipped with surveillance cameras, so the police asked for footage from November 30th. After rewinding the time the truck arrived at the house, the police saw the driver dragging a girl who looked like Athena into the car. The police quickly identified the driver as Tanner R., 31, and the police went to his address. Shortly thereafter, the man was arrested on suspicion of kidnapping and taken in for questioning. As soon as the police mentioned the video evidence, Tanner began to speak. He explained that he had actually delivered a package to Athena's house that evening. While backing up the truck, he heard a crash and went to check what had happened. There, he saw the girl lying on the ground and realized that he had accidentally hit her with his car. As he approached, Tanner noticed that the girl was not seriously injured. She was conscious and spoke to him calmly. The girl said her name was Athena. He started to feel scared. He decided to take her into the truck and try to figure out how to solve the problem. The girl continued to talk to him and said that she would tell her father about this. And Tanner became more and more worried. He didn't know what to do with the situation, because he knew that if she told an adult about the incident, he could get into legal trouble. According to Tanner, he could not think of a better way than to kill her. He thought the best way would be to break her neck, but he could not do it. He then strangled Athena to death with his hands. He hid Athena's body in a nearby river. Tanner gave the police the exact location where he left Athena. So the police went there and found Athena's body. The murder shocked not only her family, but also thousands of people across the country. All major media outlets reported the case, and many were horrified by the brutality. After the body was found, Tanner was charged with kidnapping and murder. While waiting for the medical examiner's report, the police scrutinized Tanner's identity, trying to better understand his motives. Tanner's account of the events did not seem plausible. According to Tanner, he lightly hit the girl with his heart valve, causing no serious injuries to her. However, Tanner was so depressed that he immediately decided to kill her, thinking that beating a child would cost him his job. Tanner's story seems very strange. Police found out that this man was engaged and had a 1-year-old child. In addition to delivering goods, he occasionally worked as an Uber driver. Tanner's daily life, he participated in performing in a band at several cafes in the nearby city of Fort Worth. On social media, he often posted photos with his son, snapshots during music performances, and other moments of his daily life. These images do not show that he was a cruel person. There is no information about his previous criminal record before his arrest. Police also found no indication that he might be a dangerous criminal. Meanwhile, Athena's parents filed a lawsuit against FedEx and the contracting company, accusing them of allowing Tanner to work. They called for higher standards for employee screening to prevent such crimes in the future. Police investigators said the package Tanner delivered that evening was a Christmas gift Athena's parents had ordered for her. It was a Barbie doll she had long wanted. However, when the results of the medical examination were released, the case became more complicated. Experts said Athena died within an hour of being kidnapped. Her body had suffered various degrees of injury, and the primary cause of her death was asphyxiation. Police then outlined a series of events that could have led to the incident. After an argument with her mother, Athena decided to go outside and stand in the yard. At this time, Tanner arrived to make a delivery and found her alone. According to this theory, he saw an opportunity to satisfy his lust. The area around Athena's house was quite isolated, and the police believe that Tanner may have tricked or deliberately attacked Athena to get her into the car without encountering any resistance. It is still unclear what happened next. There are two main possibilities that seem most plausible. First, Tanner may have planned to take Athena out of the house to carry out his evil intentions, but the girl started screaming or tried to escape. Fearing discovery, Tanner killed the girl and dumped her body in the river. Second, Tanner may have committed some kind of harassment against Athena that did not involve direct contact. In this case, medical experts would not find evidence of sexual assault. To learn more, police spent weeks digging into Tanner's past. They spoke to his relatives, friends, and acquaintances, looking for any signs that he might have been involved in other criminal activities. There was a major breakthrough in the investigation. The police found several people who said they had been assaulted by Tanner when they were children. However, the identities of these people have not been released to protect the investigation. One of Tanner's victims went public with her story of being assaulted by him when she was 16. She shared her story on social media in an attempt to gain attention. Surprisingly, Tanner faced no consequences for his actions and was not even considered a suspect for a long time. Sadly, the victim wrote that no one believed her during those years. However, after Tanner killed Athena, these allegations received more attention, exposing Tanner's true nature. Now Tanner will also face separate trials for 4 sexual assaults involving minors. In preparation for the trial, the government announced that they would seek the death penalty. Tanner himself has hired a lawyer to advise him to withdraw his confession and declare his innocence, but this is unlikely to help him avoid punishment, as the police have video footage from the truck as well as Tanner's testimony about the exact location of the body. We can only watch the trial unfold and wait for more details to become public. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Elizabeth Nicole Forshee-Cyperta. Elizabeth was born on May 13, 1978 in Truckee, California. She lived with her parents and younger brother. When Elizabeth was 13, the Cyperta family moved across the street. Michael and Sally Cyperta had 2 young children and were struggling to balance work and family. Michael wanted Sally to go back to work, so they decided to find a babysitter. Michael suggested hiring Elizabeth, then 14, to babysit their children. Sally agreed, and Elizabeth began babysitting for the neighbor's family. Elizabeth grew attached to Michael and Sally's children as she spent more time with them. The children also enjoyed being around her. When Elizabeth was 15, her father passed away. Traumatic event that deeply affected her. According to her mother, Donna Forshee, Elizabeth became more sensitive and vulnerable after this event. She began to admire and grow closer to Michael Cyperta, seeing him as an ideal father figure. Elizabeth believes that Michael loves his children unconditionally and supports their interests. Elizabeth used to babysit Michael and Sally's children during the day. However, she started staying at their house until late at night. This continued for about 2 years. One day, Michael decided to move to Iowa with his family to be closer to his relatives. He invited Elizabeth to come along as a babysitter. Elizabeth's mother, Donna, strongly objected and tried to stop her daughter, even calling Child Protective Services to intervene. However, Donna's efforts were in vain. Elizabeth was too attached to Michael, Sally, and their 2 children. Although she was still in high school, she was determined to stick with her decision and move to Winfield, Iowa with Cyperta's family. After Elizabeth moved away, her mother Donna and her best friend Shannon Gerber maintained regular contact with her, either by phone or by weekly letters. Elizabeth graduated from high school in Iowa in May 1997. Donna attended her graduation and gave her daughter an emerald and diamond ring, which Elizabeth treasured. During this time, Michael divorced his wife, Sally, and began a relationship with Elizabeth. After the divorce, Sally left the children with Michael and Elizabeth and moved away. Although Sally maintained contact with her children, she cut off all contact with Michael and stopped speaking to Elizabeth. Michael, then in her 40s, immediately demonstrated his controlling nature. He limited what Elizabeth could and could not do, as well as who she could talk to. He attempted to control every aspect of Elizabeth's life. From the beginning, their relationship seemed dysfunctional. As a result, Elizabeth's mother and best friend Shannon found it increasingly difficult to contact her. Michael did not like Elizabeth talking to them and would often get angry if she did. As a result, Elizabeth would only dare to call they when Michael was not home. During this time, Elizabeth became friends with Harper Tracy through church. Harper noticed that Elizabeth had suffered 5 or 6 injuries during their friendship, including finger marks on her neck and bruises on her stomach. Harper's daughter, Sadie, who was about 7 years old, knew Michael's children through church and occasionally played at their home. Sadie remembers one time when she visited. She witnessed Michael pushing Elizabeth down the stairs and kneeling on her. Harper also remembers Elizabeth arriving at church in a state of panic and fear after fleeing a violent argument with Michael. Elizabeth confided that she was afraid of Michael and could not take any more abuse. Harper discovered multiple bruises on Elizabeth's stomach and marks on her arms. Elizabeth stayed in Harper's trailer for a month. During that time, Michael appeared near the trailer almost every day and acted threateningly. He would park his truck about 10 feet away from the trailer and tease Elizabeth. Specifically, he threatened her by saying that Elizabeth would be isolated and no one would find her if she did not listen to him. He left hazmat notices and a torn cat collar outside, along with a message warning that she would disappear like the cat if she did not return. He also threatened to harm the family's animals and began blackmailing her with videotapes and photos he had. According to Harper, he threatened to kill Elizabeth and dispose of her body 6 times. Harper called the police to stop him, but unfortunately, they were unsuccessful. There were clearly many warning signs about Michael. Everyone saw him as someone to stay away from. However, Elizabeth was young and naive, so she still hoped that Michael would change. Unfortunately, at the age of 40, people rarely change their behavior and attitude towards others. After a long time of pressure from Michael, eventually, Elizabeth decided to leave Harper's Trail to live with Michael. They married in January 1998 in Mount Pleasant. Despite her attempts to prevent the marriage, Harper attended their wedding. Afterwards, Michael took the initiative to cut off all contact between Harper and Elizabeth. At Michael's request, Elizabeth finally told Harper not to come to their house anymore. Harper was not the only one concerned about Elizabeth and Michael's marriage. Elizabeth's mother, Donna, also disapproved of the relationship and refused to come to Iowa for her daughter's wedding. However, in June 2000, Elizabeth went to California to attend her younger brother's high school graduation. Although Michael stayed in Iowa, he continued to keep an eye on Elizabeth. During the 3 days Elizabeth stayed with her mother, Michael called her repeatedly. He was concerned that Donna was trying to influence Elizabeth not to return to Iowa. After each call, Elizabeth felt sad and confused. She considered leaving her husband but was not sure. To reassure Michael, Elizabeth moved out of her mother's house and moved in with Shannon Gerber, her childhood friend. Shannon had kept in touch with Elizabeth since Elizabeth moved to Iowa. They tried to talk every month, often calling when Michael was not home. However, Elizabeth's move to live with her friend did not lessen Michael's anger. Instead, he began harassing Shannon by calling her repeatedly. Most of the calls were threatening. Shannon recalled Michael threatening Elizabeth. He screamed at her and said he would kill her if she did not come home. Michael also threatened to kill Elizabeth's mother, younger brother, Shannon, and her young son. He called her constantly, day and night, sometimes dozens of times an hour. Finally, Shannon's husband couldn't take it anymore and turned off the phone. This clearly made Michael even angrier. Shannon begged Elizabeth not to return to Iowa. "I didn't want her to go because I was afraid I would never see her again," Shannon confided. She deliberately took a detour to the airport, hoping Elizabeth would miss her flight. However, the flight was delayed and Elizabeth was still able to catch it. After returning to Mount Pleasant, Iowa, Elizabeth began working at Experian. There, she met Sarah Thomas, a coworker who quickly became her best friend. Because Sarah lived near the Sapura family home, she often took Elizabeth home after work. During these trips, they talked a lot and Elizabeth gradually trusted Sarah. She shared with Sarah about her difficult relationship with her husband, Michael, and even showed Sarah the bruises on her body that Michael had caused. Elizabeth and Sarah became very close to each other, close enough to cause problems. One day, while Michael was away, his 2 children peered through the bedroom keyhole and saw Sarah and Elizabeth getting intimate. When Elizabeth discovered that the children had witnessed the scene, she hastily packed up and moved in with Sarah. When Sarah's girlfriend, Terry, went outside to walk the dog, Michael came over and asked her to call Sarah's work phone and ask Elizabeth to return home. He had a bottle of alcohol in his hand, and his children were following him and crying. Michael explained that his wife had left him. She was not answering his calls, and he did not know what to do. When Elizabeth and Sarah entered the apartment, they saw Michael and Terry waiting for them. Frightened, Elizabeth and Sarah left. Michael shouted at Terry to follow him. They got into the car and gave chase. The 2 couples met face to face in a nearby parking lot. Terry started fighting with Sarah because she felt betrayed. Elizabeth was sitting in the car at the time and was afraid to get out. Cursing, screaming, and threatening, Michael approached Elizabeth and dragged her out through the window of the car. During the struggle, Elizabeth suffered a lacerated rib and her shirt got torn. Sarah and Elizabeth fled to a nearby gas station where they reported the assault to the police. The state charged Michael with first-degree burglary and domestic abuse assault. The court approved the no-contact order protecting Elizabeth. Terry packed her things and left, so Elizabeth and Sarah started living together. Michael continued to harass Sarah despite a ban. He would sit across the street, shouting insults or verbally abusing her. Additionally, Sarah received numerous incoming phone calls, but whenever she picked up, the caller would remain silent. She filed a report with the police, who worked with her phone company to set up a trap on her line to track the origin of these calls. Over a 3-week period, from June 26th to July 16th, Sarah's phone records revealed Michael made 162 calls to her apartment. On July 16, 2000, 1 month after her breakup with Michael, Sarah left for work at 10:30 p.m. At the time, Elizabeth was asleep on the couch. Their dog was safely locked in the bathroom to avoid disturbing Elizabeth when Sarah returned home at 4 a.m. However, upon arriving back, Sarah was surprised to find that Elizabeth had vanished. There were no signs of forced entry or a struggle, and Elizabeth's personal documents remained intact. The dog was still locked in the bathroom. Sarah decided to go to bed. When she awoke the next morning, Elizabeth was still missing. It became clear that Elizabeth had left without taking her purse, clothes, or other essential belongings, and she did not leave behind any note or explanation. Sarah reported Elizabeth's disappearance to the police 24 hours after first discovering she was gone. Elizabeth was 22 years old when she disappeared. The police launched an investigation, and of course Michael was their first suspect. On July 16th, the day Elizabeth disappeared, Michael started phoning the apartment around 3 p.m., logging more than a dozen calls through the evening. He last called at 10:56 p.m. That is, he stopped making calls 26 minutes after Sarah left for work and left Elizabeth alone. On July 17th, Michael was supposed to be at work. His friend Jared agreed to watch Michael's children. Jared testified he found Michael was pretty intoxicated when he arrived at his house around 5:30 a.m. Jared said Michael told him Elizabeth had stayed overnight and left around 5 a.m. Michael decided not to go to work that morning. Police called Michael the next day, July 18th, to ask if he had heard from Elizabeth. He said he had not. On July 20th, officers came to his house to let him know Elizabeth was missing. Michael said his taking a sick day from work on July 17th, the day after Elizabeth disappeared, was a coincidence. Michael also stated that due to their breakup, he hadn't been eating and had been getting cramps. Elizabeth seemed to disappear into thin air. She didn't contact her family or friends. Her bank account was untouched, and she had not even received her salary for the last month. The investigators knew that Elizabeth could not just leave without documents and money. All the friends she could have stayed with knew nothing about her whereabouts. The police interviewed residents and distributed flyers with an image and description of Elizabeth, but none of these actions gave the desired result. In early September 2000, Larry Headland, an agent with the Iowa Department of Criminal Investigation, interviewed Michael. During the interview, Michael claimed that he and Elizabeth had a harmonious relationship and denied any allegations of abuse between them. When asked about the attack on Elizabeth on June 16th, Michael admitted that it was an unusual action on his part. He explained that he had been drinking and that his emotions had taken over, leading to his inappropriate actions. Initially, Michael denied making the harassing phone calls to Sarah's apartment. However, when presented with evidence from the call records, he admitted responsibility. The agent then pointed out that the calls to Michael's apartment had stopped the night Elizabeth went missing. This caused Michael to become stressed. Michael explained that he just wanted to avoid arrest and did not want to be charged or held responsible for anything. That's why he lied about the phone calls. He objected when Larry suggested that Elizabeth was dead. After this interview, the police obtained a search warrant for Michael's home. In Michael's bedroom, the police found an unlocked safe. Inside or on top of the safe, an officer found a $2,000 gold pendant that Michael had given Elizabeth and a V-shaped diamond and emerald ring that she had received from her mother as a graduation gift. Elizabeth only removed the ring when she was showering or soaking in the tub. Otherwise, it was on her finger. In police photos taken after Michael attacked Elizabeth, the ring was still on her hand. Elizabeth had not been back to Michael's house since. So how did the ring end up in Michael's safe? When the police asked for an explanation, Michael said that Elizabeth must have left it behind when she moved out. However, officer pointed out that Elizabeth was still wearing the ring in a photo taken on June 16th, the day of the attack. Michael could not explain why the ring was in his bedroom. There are some suspicious points in Elizabeth's disappearance. Michael abruptly stopped contacting her on the day she disappeared, although the police only notified him 4 days later. This suggests that Michael may be hiding something. However, the police need concrete evidence to charge him. Time has passed so quickly that it is difficult to find clues. One possibility is that Elizabeth voluntarily went into hiding, but her family does not believe this. Although the case has been quiet for many years, her mother, Donna, has not lost hope that her daughter will return. Every year, she travels to Iowa, where Elizabeth used to live, to organize activities to raise awareness about her daughter's disappearance. In 2010, Donna rented a billboard with Elizabeth's picture and offered a $20,000 reward for any information about her daughter. Donna said she was concerned that something might have happened to her daughter, but she was hopeful that she would eventually be found. Someone definitely knows what happened to my daughter, and I hope that us coming out will jog their memory, she said. 10 years after her daughter's disappearance, Donna has developed her own theories about what happened. In an interview, she said, "I think the person called her and lured her out of the apartment to meet them. Then they argued and something bad happened that night." Despite the best efforts of the police and her family, Elizabeth's fate remains a mystery. Since her disappearance in 2000, investigators have searched 79 different locations but have not found Elizabeth's body. They entered her information into the National Crime Information Center's Missing Persons database. 17 years later, in 2017, the investigation was reopened. By this time, Michael Saperda had moved to Colorado. Police reviewed all the evidence and interviews. They discovered a key detail that had previously been overlooked. Jared, Michael's friend who was assigned to watch Michael's children on July 17, 2000, told police that when he arrived at Michael's house at 5:30 a.m., he found Michael quite drunk. According to Jared's testimony, Michael said that Elizabeth had stayed the night and left around 5 a.m. However, in previous interviews, Michael had never mentioned Elizabeth sleeping over at his house. More significantly, Elizabeth's jewelry was found in Michael's safe. Authorities decided to arrest Michael 17 years after Elizabeth went missing. Although her body was never found, investigators believe that Elizabeth was dead and that Michael was the culprit. In November 2017, Michael was arrested in Colorado and extradited to Iowa, where he was charged with first-degree murder in the death of his wife, Elizabeth. Donna said, "This is the best news we've had in 17 years. We've waited a long time and are so glad that he's finally been arrested." Michael later waived his right to a jury trial. The loss of key physical evidence, especially the victim's body, made it significantly more difficult for prosecutors to prove guilt. Without a body, forensic experts could not determine the cause of death, and the jury could not directly observe the victim's injuries or view crime scene photos. The defense argued that the prosecutor's goal was not to find the truth, but to convict Michael by looking for inconsistencies in witness testimony. Although the trial took place 18 years after the incident, the defense acknowledged during closing arguments that a body was not required to establish a homicide. However, Michael still challenged the state's evidence of Elizabeth's death. The district court concluded that the state had proven her death beyond a reasonable doubt. The court held that any theory that Elizabeth was still alive and could reappear at any time was unrealistic. The state presented evidence that Michael was the last person to speak to Elizabeth at 10:56 p.m. on July 16th, which he himself admitted. The district court noted Jared's testimony that Michael told Elizabeth to stay at his house that night. In addition, there were other suspicious circumstances. Michael unexpectedly left work on July 17th and did not call Elizabeth's apartment again, even though the police did not officially report her missing until July 20th. From this evidence, the state established that Michael's hatred of Elizabeth led to murder. Because Michael was controlling possessive of Elizabeth, it was highly likely that he intentionally caused her physical harm when she decided to leave him for someone else. The strained relationship between them was clear evidence of Michael's intentional intent to cause harm. The state presented evidence that Michael had repeatedly threatened to kill Elizabeth and dispose of her body so that no one would find it. From these repeated threats, the jury could conclude that Michael had intended to kill Elizabeth. The court reviewed the evidence and made a crucial decision. They discovered that Elizabeth had opened a new bank account just 9 days before her disappearance, but had not withdrawn her last paycheck. They concluded that she was dead. After carefully evaluating all the evidence, the court found that Michael was responsible for Elizabeth's death. On June 25, 2018, Michael Saperda, 58, was convicted of first-degree murder. On August 23, 2018, the court sentenced him to life in prison without parole and ordered him to pay $150,000 in restitution for Elizabeth's death. However, the story does not end there. In September 2020, the Iowa Court of Appeals changed Michael Saperda's conviction from first-degree murder to second-degree murder. Judge Mary Tabor, in a 30-page ruling, noted that while there was enough evidence to conclude that Elizabeth was dead and that Michael was responsible, the prosecutor failed to prove that Michael intended to kill Elizabeth. This led to the reduced charge. The case was particularly difficult because there was no body, weapon, or crime scene. Michael asked to be released or at least given a new trial. Ultimately, the court sentenced Michael Saperda to 50 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Nikki Allen was born in England during the 1980s, one of 4 daughters to Sharon Henderson. They lived in a low-income housing estate in the city of Sunderland, located in Tyne and Wear in the northeastern part of England. At 7 years old, Nikki spent her days with her 3 sisters, Stacy, 8, Sarah, 3, and Niam, 2. Sharon, despite being a loving mother, faced a series of unfortunate relationships. The father of Stacy and Nikki abandoned them, and her subsequent partner also left, failing to take responsibility for Sarah and Niam. Sharon had to work hard to provide for her children, as none of the fathers contributed to their upbringing. Fortunately, her father, who lived in the same building, was a supportive and loving grandfather. He helped Sharon with the girls whenever he could. Despite the challenges of single motherhood, Sharon ensured her daughters never lacked anything essential. Though their budget was tight, the love and dedication Sharon showed made their home a place of joy and warmth. The family cherished weekends and holidays like Christmas and Carnival, often taking outings in the eastern parts of the city. Nikki, like most children, was oblivious to their financial struggles, radiating happiness. Described as a lively and cheerful child with adventurous spirit, her brownish-red hair contrasted beautifully with her fair skin, complemented by her vibrant brown eyes and an infectious smile that made her stand out. On the evening of Wednesday, October 7, 1992, Nikki and her sisters were being looked after by their grandfather. Around 8:30 p.m., Nikki decided to go home, which was just a floor below in the same building. It was common for one of the older girls to head home first. Nikki knew the short route well, having traversed it many times without issue. That night, Sharon returned home to find Nikki missing. Initially, this didn't raise alarm as her other daughters, Stacy, Sarah, and Niam, had not arrived either. But when they returned without Nikki, Sharon called her father, who confirmed Nikki had left his apartment 10 minutes before her sisters. The building was a tight-knit community where everyone knew each other, and mutual support was a daily practice. Nikki was well-liked for her endearing nature. In growing worry, Sharon began knocking on neighbors' doors, asking if anyone had seen her daughter and calling everyone she knew to find Nikki. When no one could provide any information, Sharon's fear turned to dread. Nikki was missing. The community organized search parties to scour every corner of the building and its surroundings. The search went on through the night and into the early hours of the morning. Sharon's anxiety escalated into panic and desperation. As dawn broke on Thursday, October 8th, with no sign of Nikki, the family contacted the authorities. The police arrived and began a thorough search, questioning residents, Sharon, the grandfather, and anyone who might know something. A discovery that froze everyone's blood was made. Nikki's small shoes were found discarded at the entrance of an abandoned building not far from her home. With heavy hearts, neighbors and police entered the building, their dread growing with each step. The tension was palpable, likened to the calm before a storm. Inside, they found a dark, sticky stain on the floor, resembling dried blood. In the middle of it lay Nikki's lifeless body, a heartbreaking end to the frantic search. It was clear at first glance that Nikki had suffered a brutal attack. She sustained multiple wounds from a sharp weapon, and her head had been struck with a brick. The scene was heartbreaking. Nikki's fragile body lay in a pool of blood, utterly alone in an abandoned building. This moment marked the beginning of a relentless fight for justice for Nikki, a fight that she rightfully deserved. News of this horrific incident spread rapidly, shocking the entire city of Sunderland. The community was not only devastated because it involved a young, innocent child, but also because of the sheer brutality of the crime. The support for the family was overwhelming. Hundreds gathered to support Sharon and her family at the painful funeral. The media quickly picked up the story, pushing for updates on the investigation, which in turn put immense pressure on the authorities to solve the case. The police started the investigation. The entire intelligence apparatus was mobilized to find clues and testimonies that could shed light on the perpetrator. A composite sketch was created and compared with various suspects. However, as months passed, no solid leads emerged and no suspects were identified. Despite the pain and anguish, Sharon did not give up. Throughout 1992, she remained resilient, giving interviews and urging the authorities to produce results. The detectives assured Sharon of their unwavering support and the commitment of the entire Sunderland police force to find the culprit and bring them to justice. But beyond the declarations and good intentions, the path to truth was fraught with obstacles and dead ends. Yet, Sharon clung to the hope that justice would eventually be served for the tragic loss of her beloved daughter. In late 1993, the investigation focused on George Heron, a young man who lived near Nikki's home. The evidence found at his residence was troubling. A knife matching the pattern of Nikki's wounds was discovered, along with blood stains on his shoes and clothes. George's sister provided crucial information, noting that on the night Nikki disappeared, George had spent an unusually long time in the bathroom. Although George initially denied leaving that night, for witnesses claimed to have seen him at nearby pubs buying Nikki's favorite chips. The police believe George used the snacks to lure Nikki to the abandoned building where she was killed. George insisted he was innocent, but he was detained as a suspect. After 3 days of intense interrogation, George confessed to Nikki's murder. This confession, though initially accepted, was later invalidated as it was obtained through coercion. All the evidence against him was circumstantial, but the police were confident they would secure a conviction. News of the arrest of the confessed killer was met with some relief, and the media quickly broadcast the development. Sharon felt a burden lifted, having spent an entire year desperately searching for her daughter's attacker, whom she described as a monster. The media detailed every aspect of the case against George, including his full name, residence, and image. However, the case against George fell apart when the court ruled his recorded confession inadmissible, citing it was obtained through police intimidation. After a brief trial, it was concluded that there was no evidence proving George's involvement in the crime, and he was declared innocent of Nikki's murder. For his protection, following public scrutiny, George was granted a new identity and relocated away from Sunderland to start anew. Nevertheless, Sharon believed in the police's version and remained convinced that George was responsible for her family's tragedy. Determined to seek justice, Sharon filed a civil suit against George in 1994, accusing him of wrongful death. The court ruled in Sharon's favor, ordering George to pay over £7,000, a sum she never received as George could not be located. Despite the setback, the police continued to investigate, gathering reports and following leads, but the case grew cold over time. 20 years after Nikki's tragic death, the case remained open but stagnant. Unexpectedly, a breakthrough emerged, offering new hope for justice for Nikki and her anguished family. In February 2014, serial offender Stephen Grieve's son, already incarcerated, became a suspect. His modus operandi in previous crimes closely matched Nikki's case. Stephen had a history of cooperating with authorities, confessing to unsolved crimes and providing valuable information on similar cases, making him a crucial resource for the investigators. However, this time Stephen took a completely different approach. He declared his innocence and refused to cooperate with any aspect of the investigation. After decades of dead ends and false leads, hopes were pinned on the significant advancements in forensic technology of that era. Investigators conducted blood analyses to find evidence linking Stephen to Nikki's murder, but the results ultimately excluded him as a suspect. Once again, they were back to square one and had to start from scratch. This was disappointing news for the investigators and for Sharon, Nikki's mother, who had placed her hopes on this new lead. Despite the setback, Sharon didn't give in to despair. Committed to keeping her daughter's case in the public eye, she continued to give interviews to the media. Through her courageous persistence, she hoped to keep Nikki's memory alive and to maintain pressure on the authorities to fulfill their duty of ensuring justice for her little girl. As the 25th anniversary of Nikki's murder approached, Sharon made a public revelation that was both raw and heartbreaking. She admitted that she had not been a good mother to Stacy, Sarah, and Naim. She acknowledged that her other 3 daughters had grown up feeling neglected, accustomed to seeing their mother constantly dealing with the media and police, dedicating all her time and effort to keeping Nikki's case in the spotlight. Sharon's candid admission had a profound impact on the British public and sparked a wide-ranging debate about the struggles faced by those who suffer the tragic loss of a loved one and how it can affect other important areas of their lives. Moved by Sharon's public self-reproach and suffering, the community once again rallied around Nikki's case, demanding answers about the current state of the investigation and what was being done to find the culprit. The pressure on the authorities intensified and hopes for justice for Nikki were reignited. The media also got involved, emphasizing that the quest for truth and justice for Nikki was not just a legal battle, but also an emotional and exhausting ordeal for Sharon and her family. In May 2016, Sharon received a startling call from a woman claiming to have new information about Nikki's murder. This person, who had been 12 years old at the time of Nikki's disappearance and had been babysitting near the crime scene, shared her memories and possible leads with the police. In September of the same year, Sharon launched an online petition demanding a new, thorough investigation into Nikki's case. The petition quickly gained support, garnering hundreds of signatures in less than 24 hours, reflecting the public's interest in finding answers and justice for Nikki. However, the police and judicial system seemed to move at a frustratingly slow pace. Throughout 2017, Sharon continued to press the authorities. They assured her that they were still working on the case, even if no public updates were given. Unbeknownst to many, specialists were conducting DNA tests on hundreds of men who had lived in the area at the time of the crime. This effort eventually led to a valuable lead. In October 2017, around the 25th anniversary of Nikki's death, the police announced a significant forensic breakthrough that could potentially resolve the case. They had successfully obtained a DNA sample from an unknown male, offering new hope. On April 17, 2018, the police arrested David Thomas Boyd, a 54-year-old man previously convicted of offenses against children, as a suspect in Nikki's murder. Based on new evidence gathered during 2016 and 2017, it was discovered that David had been a former neighbor of Nikki's grandfather, making him a potential suspect who fit the perpetrator's profile. The police raided a house where David lived and detained him. The authorities conducted a new round of interrogations, meticulously examining alibis and available evidence. However, lacking solid evidence directly linking him to Nikki's murder, they had to release him pending further investigation. Despite being a promising lead, the lack of conclusive evidence prevented David from being formally charged at that time. The case remained unsolved, and the search for the true culprit continued. The most devastating blow for Sharon came in 2019. The detective who had been assigned to the case from the beginning and had since become Chief Inspector of Sunderland Police was unexpectedly appointed as the new Chief of Police in Cleveland. This personnel change raised concerns about the proper continuity of the investigation, as it was unprecedented for a police chief from one city to simultaneously manage an ongoing case in another city. For Sharon, this news was a crushing setback, and she expressed her dismay publicly. As if that weren't enough, the detective was hired as part of a sensationalist television program that sought to track fugitives involved in crimes against celebrities. The scandal caused a national uproar. especially at a time when the reputation of the English police was under scrutiny due to various unfortunate events involving some law enforcement officers. Nevertheless, both the detective and the Sunderland Police Department issued a statement assuring that the investigation had not been halted and that they remained committed to finding Nikki's killer. Despite the obstacles and challenges, Sharon and the authorities' determination to achieve justice for Nikki remained unshaken. In April 2019, David was detained and interrogated once more about Nikki's case. However, the pandemic caused further delays, imposing limitations on judicial processes. Nonetheless, the police dedicated themselves to individually testing DNA samples from 839 men across the country related to the case or investigation, aiming to eliminate them as suspects. During 2020 and 2021, Sharon received new reports about potential leads and revelations from new witnesses who claimed to have unheard of information about the case. These new clues added to the previous efforts to uncover the truth that had remained elusive for the police, especially for Sharon, who was approaching 30 years of fighting for justice for her daughter. In January 2022, the police officially referred the case to the Crown Prosecution Service, thus transferring responsibility from Sunderland police detectives to a new administrative direction, placing the case in a bureaucratic limbo, much to Sharon's dismay. Fortunately, Sharon's fears were unfounded. In May 2022, there was a significant breakthrough when David was formally charged with Nikki's murder. He appeared before the court, pleaded not guilty, but was remanded in custody. On April 20th, 2023, the trial began. During the hearings, evidence against David was presented, including an animated video showing how he had dragged and disposed of Nikki's body. The prosecutor explicitly assured the jury that David was the true perpetrator of the fatal assault on Nikki. The trial continued with crucial testimonies and details about how David had lured Nikki to the site and committed the horrific acts. The prosecution presented evidence of David's DNA found on Nikki's clothing, which further strengthened the case against him. The prosecution alleged that David had taken Nikki to a wasteland by the River Ware, where he struck her on the head. They added that he had forced Nikki through an opening in a boarded-up window of the abandoned building, where he attacked her until she died. The autopsy revealed that Nikki had suffered a blunt force trauma to the head, likely rendering her unconscious before receiving the fatal stab wounds. The trial also revealed that David Boyd had been convicted in March 2000 for indecent assault on a girl in a Stockton park on April 8, 1999. He had also been convicted of public order offenses in 1986 when he approached 4 children and grabbed a 10-year-old girl. Another detail revealed during the trial was that David knew the layout of the abandoned building where Nikki was found and had used the same window days earlier when he took a boy there, supposedly to look for pigeons. The defense argued that the evidence was merely innocent coincidences and that there was no direct proof of David's guilt. David concocted a story to explain the presence of his DNA on Nikki's clothing. He claimed he had spat from his balcony on the night of the incident, and Nikki might have touched a railing where his saliva landed, then wiped her hands on her clothes, transferring the DNA. The judge explained to the jury that the case was based on circumstantial evidence, but the evidence presented so far strongly pointed to David's guilt. On May 12, 2023, after just 2.5 hours of deliberation, the jury found David guilty of Nikki Allen's murder. The verdict was a huge relief for Sharon and a victory for justice after decades of relentless pursuit. The man who ended Nikki's life and dreams and caused immense pain to her family would finally face justice for his cruel actions. On a day that seemed unreachable for Sharon, she finally got the results she had long awaited after 31 long years. When the court delivered the verdict declaring the man guilty, the news was met with a mix of relief and emotion, and the courtroom erupted in applause. Outside the court, under torrential rain, Nikki's family shared tears, hugs, and kisses. Despite the celebrations, there was still discontent among the family regarding the way the police investigation was conducted. Despite the historic verdict, Sharon expressed her frustration over the long wait and the fact that the man had lived freely for years without deserving it. Nikki's older sister, Stacy, recalled seeing David several times near the buildings where they lived during their childhood. She mentioned that all the children distrusted him and described him as a very creepy figure. At the time of her statements, Stacy was 39 years old and shared the profound impact finding her sister's body had on the community, as well as the immense damage to their family. As candid as her mother about the devastating effects of losing Nikki, Stacy confessed to having behavioral problems and resorted to substance abuse and rave parties to escape the pain. However, she eventually found a path to recovery and redemption. She now works helping people with substance and alcohol dependencies overcome their struggles and is also a boxing coach. The long-awaited news came on May 23, 2023. David was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 29 years before he could be eligible for parole, meaning he would only be able to apply for release on August 16, 2049. Following the verdict, the police issued an apology to 56-year-old Sharon for the failures in the original investigation and celebrated that Nikki's case was finally closed. After the news broke, Sharon spoke to BBC News about the 31 years of waiting for Nikki to receive justice. When asked about the police's apology, she said she did not accept it. She pointed out that she had repeatedly asked if they were considering David as a suspect, but was never listened to. She felt abandoned by the police all those years and stated that it took a forensic DNA breakthrough to finally capture David, who should have been on the police's radar from the beginning. Adding to her indignation was the fact that she learned about the conviction through the news. In response, the police stated that they had tried multiple times to contact Sharon, but could not reach her until after the media interviews. They assured that she would be given the opportunity to speak with a senior police official. Sharon responded that she preferred actions over words and urged the police to investigate other individuals she believed might be implicated in the crime. The official response to Sharon's new suspicions came swiftly. The investigator who had led the investigation since 1992 asserted that the police were confident David acted alone. She also expressed a desire to share information with Sharon to put her mind at ease. Indeed, the conviction of the guilty party provided some relief and closure to Nikki's family. However, Sharon said that a wound remained open in her heart. Nikki's story teaches us the importance of persevering until the truth is found. It also highlights the need to ensure that families who lose a loved one to violent crime receive adequate support throughout the often devastating process of seeking justice. The case of Alexandra Morgan. Alexandra Morgan, known as Alexandra to friends and family, is a single mother of 2 children, aged 4 and 11. They live in Wilsley Pound, Cranbrook, Kent. Alexandra has lost contact with the children's father and has had to raise them on her own, which has not been easy. According to some sources, she works as a dog groomer. Alexandra is described as a dynamic and ambitious woman who is always looking after her children. She wants her children to have a better life and has worked hard to achieve it. On November 13, 2021, Alexandra met her parents and left her children in their care. She said she was going on a spa holiday with friends for 3 days. However, by November 17th, Alexandra had not returned to pick up her children as scheduled. Her parents began to worry because they could not contact Alexandra by phone or text, which was very unusual. After several unsuccessful attempts to find their daughter, they decided to report Alexandra missing to the police. Kent police suspect that Alexandra Morgan's disappearance is related to a crime. They began their investigation by looking into the spa where Alexandra said she was going to go with friends. The police also wanted to identify these friends. Start an investigation. Police have obtained video footage from a gas station in Cranbrook where Alexandra was last seen. They are trying to locate her by looking for her white Mini Cooper. On the morning of November 14th, Alexandra went to the gas station to fill up, made a few purchases, and then left. The video shows nothing unusual. Rose McCauley, the petrol station manager who has known Alexandra for 17 years, was there when Alexandra bought £10 worth of petrol, a cup of coffee, and a snack on the morning she went missing. Rose said that no one knew what had happened to her or where she had gone. Rose continued that a friend and she had searched all over Hastings, but Alexandra was nowhere to be seen. She said that Alexandra wasn't shy, so she didn't think Alexandra was scared to go home. Rose just hoped nothing bad had happened and that Alexandra would get back safely. It was worrying, she added. When Alexandra arrived that Sunday morning, she was very well dressed, with more makeup than usual, her hair done in semi-catching clothes. She arrived earlier than usual, looking happy and smiling. Alexandra's friends mentioned that in 2018, she shared on social media about being stalked by a stalker. In 2019, she posted a photo with the caption, "Hello Stalker," and included a message asking the stalker to stop following her page. A police spokesman said that it was unusual for Alexandra to have not contacted her family and that they were treating it as a possible murder. As the investigation continued, they were appealing for anyone who might have seen Alexandra or her white Mini Cooper with a black top to contact. He added that even if people were not sure what they saw, they should report any suspicious information. Alexandra was described as a woman approximately 168 centimeters tall of slim build with shoulder-length brown hair. She was last seen wearing a knee-length green quilted jacket, a black top underneath, ripped blue jeans, knee-high black boots, and a silver necklace. Usually, when someone goes missing, they don't leave any traces behind to help the police investigate. Many missing cases remain unsolved. However, Alexandra Morgan's case is different. She left behind the last digital traces that helped the police find clues to her fate. Not only that, these traces also revealed some shocking secrets. Further investigation helped the police find out more information about Alexandra. She wanted to improve her finances, so she started working as a call girl and advertised her services online without telling her family and friends. Women in this profession are among the most vulnerable. Everyone knows that they face risks because it is impossible to know in advance whether the next customer is normal or dangerous. This job is unsafe. According to the investigation, Alexandra had an appointment with a regular customer before she went missing. The police have arrested this man. On November 25, 2021, they arrested a 40-year-old man, Mark Brown, from St. Leonards-on-Sea on suspicion of murder. Mark Brown, a construction worker who is married with a son, his family were completely unaware of his secret life. Sussex police said that before Alexandra went missing, she had met Mark several times, and he had even bought her a Mini Cooper. Their first meeting took place on June 8, 2021, after Mark spotted her on an adult website. They met at her home in Sissinghurst, near Cranbrook, Kent. Things went well, and they continued to meet occasionally after that. The second meeting took place on June 21st, nearly 2 weeks later. This time, Alexandra went to Little Bridge Farm near Hastings, Kent, a property Mark rented to meet women and for other purposes. They met 7 more times in August and September. Alexandra did not realize she was falling into a trap. On October 23, 2021, Mark sent her a text message asking if she would like to engage in a risk-free business transaction. He made an offer that involved £100,000 for 35 days at a hotel he would protect, a new ID, a straight car, and money for shopping. Mark asked her to do some simple tasks, go out for a smoke, pack the money, and buy a few things. After receiving this offer, Alexandra did some online research, which showed that she wanted to improve her children's lives. She learned about the minimum deposit for buying a house in 2021. Alexandra also intended to use the money to start a business. She searched for information such as profits from opening a sunbed shop in the UK and taxes to pay on £100,000. These actions showed Alexandra's character and desire to improve her life. Alexandra lied to her parents that she was going to the spa with friends, but in fact she was planning to meet Mark at the farm. On the morning of November 14th, she left home and was recorded on CCTV buying petrol in Cranbrook at 7:20 a.m. She arrived at Little Bridge Farm at around 8 a.m. 3 days later, on November 17th, Mark drove Alexandra's car to Holmes Lane, St. Leonards, after replacing the real number plates with fake ones. The following day, November 18th, Alexandra's mother reported her daughter to the police because she had not picked her up and had stopped communicating. On November 23rd, police discovered CCTV footage of Alexandra's car following Mark's Jaguar to Little Bridge Farm. Kent police sealed off the entrance to the farm and interviewed Mark. He admitted meeting Alexandra, but claimed she had left after 45 minutes. Mark agreed to allow police to take his fingerprints and DNA. 2 days later, on November 25th, police arrested Mark as the prime suspect in Alexandra Morgan's disappearance. Before we get into what happened to Alexandra, we need to go back to when she met Mark Brown. At that time, Mark had a wife named Leah Ware. She was 33, and she was a mother of 3 who does not have custody of her children. Leah first met Mark on March 25, 2018, through a prostitution website where she advertised her services. A few years later, this same website is where Mark met Alexandra Morgan. In late 2018, Mark and Leah began a relationship and moved into an apartment together. After 6 months, when their lease expired, Leah moved into a shipping container at Mark Best's Little Bridge farm. Mark describes their relationship as a roller coaster of ups and downs. Leah has had a complicated life. She received weekly benefits, which were usually administered by Mark. She had a history of drug use and mental illness, but many said she was trying to improve herself in order to gain custody of her children. Mark and Leah were in a 3-year relationship before Leah mysteriously disappeared in May 2021. On the evening of May 5th and early morning of May 6th was with Jack Tyler, a friend and convicted drug dealer. They used drugs together and had an intimate relationship that night. This was the last time anyone saw Leah. The last call from her phone was made at 8:55 a.m. on May 7th. Police believe Leah died that day. On June 8, 2021, Mark met Alexandra for the first time at her home. The meeting went well and Alexandra found Mark to be a reasonable and generous man. However, she did not know that just a month earlier, Leah, who had been in a relationship with Mark, had disappeared without a trace. During the investigation, detectives discovered important text messages from Mark. He sent them to his ex-girlfriend from high school 5 days after meeting Alexandra Morgan. However, the content of the messages had nothing to do with Alexandra, and were about Leah. The message reads, "I'll try to be careful. This happened recently. It's a nasty thing to get rid of. Just an old oil drum, 5 liters of diesel, and everything is gone. It burns so hot, it almost glows white. My actions are heartbreaking. It's ironic that a psychopath has a conscience." Investigators suspect Alexandra Morgan is dead and may not be Mark's only victim. Sussex police are appealing to the public for help in locating Leah or her body, as well as any information relating to her disappearance. After arresting Mark on November 25, 2021, police searched his farm and found a container that showed signs of having been recently burned. Inside the container, experts found bone and tooth remains. Contests confirmed that these were those of Alexandra Morgan. In a joint statement, Kent and Sussex police expressed their condolences to Alexandra and Leah's families. They confirmed that Alexandra's remains had been found, but Leah's remains have not yet been found. The investigation is ongoing and police are appealing for anyone with information. Police describe Leah as a white woman, 168 centimeters tall, of slim build with very long black hair and blue eyes. She had 3 tattoos, a dragon on her right leg, Chinese characters on her right hip, and a fairy sitting on a flower with the name Ryan on her right leg. The search of Mark's house lasted about a month and ended on January 7, 2022. During the investigation, police discovered the skeleton of a Pomeranian dog at the bottom of the pond with a heavy object tied to its neck. Investigators believe this was Leah's dog, which Mark threw into the pond after killing Leah. On February 1, 2022, police charged Mark with the murder of Leah Ware, although they did not find her remains. Mark had previously been charged with the murder of Alexandra Morgan. Mark initially denied all charges. However, when police presented evidence of him burning Alexandra Morgan's body, Mark admitted to Alexandra's death, but maintained that it was an accident. Mark Brown's trial began on October 17, 2022. During the trial, new information about the 2 cases was revealed. The jury heard that after Leah Ware went missing on May 7, 2021, Mark regularly used her new bank card to withdraw money from her account each week. The bank card was sent to the address of his sister Cheryl. In July 2021, the jury was informed that Mark had twice withdrawn £200 from Leah Ware's account shortly after transferring £200 into his own. When asked why, Mark explained that he could have used her £200 and then paid it back, as at that point, someone owed him £1 for 30, so he could have paid it back. Prosecuting attorney Duncan Atkinson asked if it was a coincidence that Leah had died after getting a new bank card. A surprised Mark replied that he didn't understand what Duncan meant and that, as far as he knew, Leah was still alive. Duncan continued by asking if Mark was trying to take Ms. Leah's money and pointed out that Leah was in a place where money didn't mean anything. Mark was confused and said he didn't understand what Duncan was talking about at all, adding that it sounded like they were talking about two different people. During the trial for Alexandra Morden's death, Mark maintained that it was an accident. He explained that Alexandra slipped and fell on a piece of equipment in the workshop he rented at Little Bridge Fawn, causing her to hit her head. When he rushed to her, he found Alexandra bleeding profusely. He grabbed a towel to try to stop the bleeding, but when he lifted her head to put the towel under, more blood came out. Prosecuting attorney Duncan Atkinson objected to the defendant's testimony, stating that when the defendant first saw the victim lying on her back on the ground, there was a lot of blood around her head. This clearly showed that she was seriously injured and needed immediate help, especially medical attention. This was obvious before the defendant did anything else. Mark replied that he was panicking and his first reaction was to grab a towel to stop the bleeding. After performing CPR and checking for breathing by holding a mirror to Alexandra Morgan's mouth and nose, Mark confirmed that she was dead. Over the next 5 minutes, he did 3 things. He used his sweater to block the blood, he went outside to vomit, and he retrieved his phone to call 911. He explained that he then decided to cover up the whole thing by wrapping Alexandra in a sleeping bag and wrapping a towel around her head to stop the bleeding. He questioned how he could prove it was an accident and admitted that the decision to cover it up was stupid and the worst mistake of his life. Mark then decided to dispose of Alexandra's body using an incinerator he had built from an old oil drum earlier that year and which he had often used to burn rubbish. "I had heard stories about burning dead bodies," he said, "and I didn't want anyone to stumble upon a body lying around." Mark therefore maintained that he had nothing to do with Leah Ware's disappearance and believed she was still alive while Alexandra's death was assumed an accident. At the trial, the court heard testimony from Mark's boss, Allen, who said that Mark had warned him that the police might come to arrest him. This conversation took place on November 24th. When Allen asked why the police might arrest him, Mark replied, "For double murder." This answer was significant because Mark implicitly admitted that Leah Ware was dead and that Alexandra Morgan's death was not an accident. Mark denied those words, claiming he only mentioned a 25-year sentence for one murder, not a double murder. Prosecutor Duncan asked about the murder, and Mark admitted his feelings about Alexandra's case made him act as he did, despite his inability to prove his innocence. The jury also heard that Mark had deliberately smeared Alexandra and Leah reputations, as the prosecutor put it, to create a false image of the women. What people should remember about Leah and Alexandra is that they were always smiling and happy in life. They both deserve to be remembered by their loved ones for the wonderful qualities they were. On December 1st, 2022, a jury of 12 found Mark, 41, guilty on all counts. Judge Nicholas Hilliard said, "This is an extremely serious case and the impact on the victim's family is immeasurable." He announced that Mark would be sentenced to life in prison and that he would have to decide what minimum time Mark should serve or even whether to grant clemency. The judge stressed that if Mark revealed what he had done to Leah Ware's body, he would take that information into account when sentencing. However, Mark did not take this opportunity. Before the judge delivered his verdict, the court heard from Leah Ware's mother, Rebecca Martin, about the impact the case had had on the family. "Mark continues to cause our family pain by not revealing what happened. Leah lost her life because Mark Brown wanted to satisfy his dark desires," she said. "He controlled and manipulated every aspect of her life. When she was no longer of any value, he abandoned her like a lifeless object." The court also heard from Alexandra Morden's parents, who said Alexandra was intelligent, energetic, and determined to succeed. Despite the challenges she faced, she overcame them and held out hope for her future and the child she loved dearly. On January 13th, 2023, the court sentenced Mark Brown to 2 life terms. He will be eligible for parole after 49 years. Judge Hilliard imposed the sentence in absentia because Mark refused to appear. He said, "No sentence can ever measure the number of lives lost. Nothing can undo the defendant's actions. Cannot. His conscience is not troubled by what he has done. Robert William Fisher was born on April 13, 1961 in Brooklyn, New York. His father, William Fisher, worked as a banker while his mother, Jan Howell, was a homemaker. Robert was the eldest of 3 siblings, having 2 younger sisters with whom he shared a close bond, particularly with his youngest sister, with whom he was like best friends. In 1976, Robert faced a significant upheaval in his family when his parents divorced. His mother cited his father's controlling behavior as the primary reason for their separation. Unlike his sisters, Robert was deeply affected by the divorce. As the eldest, he had spent the most time with both parents together, making the split especially hard for him to understand and cope with. Fisher enlisted in the United States Navy and attempted to become part of the SEALs, but was not successful. He was an avid outdoorsman, hunter, and fisherman. Eventually, in 1987, he met Mary Cooper, who would become the love of his life. They got married and Robert began working various jobs, although he did not have a specific career path. At one point, he worked as a firefighter but had to quit due to a back injury. He later trained in other fields, including surgical catheters, and ultimately became a respiratory therapist. After marrying Mary, they settled in Scottsdale, Arizona, buying a house for $80,000 to start their family. Mary Cooper was a devoted homemaker and deeply religious, sharing her faith with Robert. Both were raised in Christian households and were active members of their church community. In 1991, their first daughter, Brittany, was born, followed by their son, Bobby. The Fishers were a close-knit family, raising their children with strong Christian values. Mary was known to be extremely loving and dedicated to her children, who were bright and excelled in school and sports. Brittany, in particular, stood out for her academic achievements and involvement in activities like gymnastics and soccer. But Robert was described as a cruel and distant control freak toward his family. He and his wife often argued about sex and money, with Mary taking a job she referred to as a security fund to her friends. Fisher once turned a garden hose on Mary for speaking out of turn. He was embarrassed that his son Bobby didn't enjoy hunting or fishing, and once tried to teach him and his daughter Brittany to swim by throwing them off a boat. Fisher imposed strict rules at home, insisting that the walls be painted only white and allowing only a few pictures to be hung. Several times, Mary's mother made special things, like quilts, but Mary was not allowed to hang them up. She had to store them in the closet. Despite these behaviors, Fisher tried to maintain an image as a devoted family man. However, the Fisher family's seemingly perfect life took a devastating turn in April 2001. On the morning of April 10, 2001, at around 8:30 a.m., emergency services began receiving multiple calls about a house fire in their neighborhood. The house in question belonged to the Fishers. Initially, it was believed that the family might have been inside, and the fire was possibly caused by a gas leak or a stove left on. Upon extinguishing the fire, the bodies of Mary, Brittany, and Bobby were found in their beds, but Robert was missing. This led to an intense search for him, initially hoping he was unaware of the tragedy. However, as hours turned into days and then weeks, Robert Fisher's disappearance made him the prime suspect in the investigation. Neighbors reported hearing a loud argument between Mary and Robert the night before the fire, around 10:30 p.m. This was not unusual, as their arguments had become a regular occurrence. Years earlier, Robert had suffered a back injury and sought massages to alleviate the pain. While Mary was away on a retreat with the children, Robert allegedly visited a place of prostitution or met with a woman he had been seeing. This incident caused significant guilt for Robert, a devout Christian, and he eventually confessed to Mary. The confession led to a major crisis in their marriage, but they decided to attend counseling through their church in an attempt to mend their relationship. Despite counseling, the arguments continued. Neighbors noted that Mary was often the louder one during these fights, frequently expressing her frustration and pain over the betrayal. The investigation revealed that Robert was captured on a surveillance camera at a nearby ATM at 10:45 p.m. on the night of the fire, withdrawing $280. The footage also showed his Toyota 4Runner in the background. The amount withdrawn was considered the maximum allowed at that time, leading to speculation about his motives. The discovery of this withdrawal, coupled with the violent nature of the crime scene, pointed towards Robert Fisher as the main suspect. Despite an extensive manhunt, Robert Fisher remains a fugitive and his whereabouts are unknown. The tragic events left the Fisher family shattered, and the community continues to seek justice for Mary, Brittany, and Bobby. When the autopsies were performed on the charred bodies of Mary and her 2 children, they found that Mary had been injured in 2 ways. Her throat had been slashed, nearly decapitating her, and she had been shot in the head. The children's throats had also been cut, nearly decapitating them as well. This happened, they say, on the night the neighbors heard the argument. Many believe that the screams the neighbors heard were not from the fight itself, but from the actual moment of the murders. The bodies were found in the morning, about 10 hours after they had been killed, when the house exploded. How did the house explode? Investigators say that a gas line was left open in the house's oven. A lit candle was placed in the hallway, and over those 10 hours as the house filled with gas, it eventually reached the candle, causing the explosion. Robert became the main suspect, especially because he disappeared after the incident and never reappeared, making it obvious to the police that he was involved. Many thought that with his knowledge as a firefighter and his work in mechanics, he believed there would be no evidence left to incriminate him. They assumed he might have planned to make it seem like he was also inside the house, and due to the fire's intensity, his body wouldn't be found. This, they thought, was his way of escaping the situation. But why would he murder his own family? There are many theories, but the most focused one in this case is that he didn't want to allow a divorce from Mary. As I mentioned earlier, Robert experienced his parents' divorce when he was very young, which hit him very hard. Friends who knew him said he often mentioned he would never let his children go through what he had endured. In the days leading up to the incident, Robert had been unfaithful to Mary, and although she forgave him once, he cheated again. Mary, realizing this, decided it was enough and sought a divorce. Some friends mentioned that just days before, Mary had explained her plans to divorce Robert and that she was determined to go through with it. This decision did not sit well with Robert, who didn't want his children to experience the trauma of divorce. This led him to act as he did, believing that if he couldn't have Mary and his children, no one else could. Regarding Robert's personality, many would think he was a normal man with a wonderful family life, but that wasn't the case. Over time, some of his peculiar behaviors became apparent. For instance, he had a strange and intense passion for hunting. Friends recounted that once, after killing an animal during a hunt, he smeared its blood all over his face and body in a bizarre manner. On another occasion, while fishing, he reportedly dived into the water with a knife in his mouth and began stabbing fish to catch them, which was quite unusual. Additionally, he struggled with the disappointment of not being able to join the firefighters or the U.S. Navy due to a back problem, which seemed to weigh heavily on him. Moreover, those who knew him more intimately spoke of his controlling nature. Mary had confided in her mother-in-law that Robert's controlling behavior made her feel very strange and uncomfortable. His mother acknowledged that she had divorced Robert's father for similar reasons, as he had been equally controlling. There were also reports of Robert being extremely harsh with his children, pushing them to share his passion for hunting and forcing them to learn about and handle firearms. These behaviors painted a picture of a man with deep-seated issues, ultimately leading to the tragic events that unfolded. On one occasion, while hunting, he approached a family having a picnic and fired shots into the air to scare them. Several years before his wife and children were murdered, Fisher shot a stray pit bull. He claimed that he shot it because it attacked his Labrador retriever, but police maintained that he orchestrated the encounter because he wanted to shoot the dog. Fisher had been an active participant in the Scottsdale Baptist Church's men's ministry, but in contrast to Mary, had begun to withdraw from church activities a few months prior to the murders. According to some of Fisher's friends, Fisher spoke of committing suicide around 1998 when he despaired over the condition of his marriage. In 1998, the Fishers went to the senior pastor for marital counseling. Robert gradually distanced himself from the marriage counseling provided by the church, which contributed to the deterioration of his marriage. To many, they appeared to be a perfect family, especially in front of the church. Mary's father even believed for a long time that Robert was completely innocent because he was always so good with the kids and portrayed the image of a wonderful father. Mary never shared the troubles she faced in her marriage with her father. He couldn't comprehend that Robert could harm his wife and children, believing instead that Robert had been kidnapped. When the police presented evidence, Mary's father was in disbelief but began seeking justice for his daughter. Unfortunately, he passed away 2 years after the incident without seeing justice served. Further investigation revealed that Robert had multiple facets to his personality, suggesting a significant personality disorder. In some home videos, he is seen instructing his daughter to smile more, be very happy, then act scared and pull her hair. His behavior is peculiar, and at one point, he orders Mary to turn off the camera, looking at her harshly. In another disturbing video, he has his children parade around with firearms, almost pointing one at Mary to make her turn off the camera. These clues led the police to consider Robert Fisher the sole person of interest, eventually placing him on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. By April 20th of the same year, several days after the incident, his Toyota truck was found in the National Forest where he was seen withdrawing money from an ATM. Near the passenger door, a large pile of human excrement was discovered, leading investigators to believe he was hiding in the area, possibly in one of the many caves. Reports of sightings began to surface, with one couple claiming they saw him walking along Young Road days before the truck was found. Some speculated he had hidden in a cave and perished, while others found it odd that his beloved dog, Blue, stayed by the truck for about 5 days without food or water. This led to confusion about why Robert left the dog there and whether it indicated anything about his state of mind or plans. On July 19th, an official arrest warrant was issued for Robert Fisher on charges of first-degree murder and arson. A $100,000 reward was offered for information leading to his capture, with many believing he was alive and living under a new identity. Descriptions of Robert emphasized his average appearance, a white male with light eyes and blonde hair. However, his distinctive walk due to back surgery, a surgery scar, and a gold crown on one of his teeth could help identify him. The public was warned that Fisher was considered armed and dangerous. The police also released age-progressed images to show how he might look now, aiding the public in identifying him. The police began to question whether Robert Fisher had planned his actions premeditatedly, but they discovered that it might not have been the case. His actions suggested a mix of surprise and a determined effort to flee and avoid capture. A truck driver reported helping a man who closely resembled Robert Fisher after the man's car broke down. Another testimony came from a woman who saw a man resembling Fisher. While she went to the bathroom, the man ordered a drink and stared at the fireplace for a long time. On the same night, another woman arrived at a hostel, asking for shelter because her boyfriend had just left her. The two women described the man similarly, raising suspicions that someone might have helped him escape, possibly a lover. Despite all this, the police doubted that Fisher could survive long-term in the wilderness, even though he enjoyed hunting and fishing. They considered the possibility of suicide a common outcome for those who commit such crimes against their families. However, nobody was found, leading many to believe he might be living in South America. Some think he might be in Mexico, where he could live off cash without needing a credit card, while others suggest he might be in Brazil using his medical knowledge. In 2001, a man called a program called Most Wanted, claiming to be Robert Fisher, saying they would never find him. The police doubted the call's authenticity. In 2004, a man in Canada with a striking resemblance to Fisher was detained. When Robert's former neighbor saw him, he was convinced it was Fisher. The man had the same scar on his back and a missing gold tooth. However, fingerprint analysis proved it wasn't him. Despite these setbacks, the police continue to receive numerous sightings, but only a few have been somewhat credible. They urge anyone who sees someone resembling Robert Fisher to contact the authorities immediately, especially in Latin America, where he might be hiding. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.